Have you ever stopped to think that maybe no one, absolutely no one, really knows you? That everyone you call friends only knows the side of you you choose to show? What if I told you that behind every hug, every smile, and every word of support, there's just a relationship between masks? Carl Jung warned us about this hidden wound, the loneliness of never being truly seen, an emptiness we feel even when surrounded by people. Because the truth is too hard to admit. No one is your true friend as long as you remain hidden from yourself. From an early age, we were taught to smile, to be accepted, to please so as not to be rejected, to swallow pain so as not to appear weak. So we sew a mask every day, a mask so well made that, over time, even we forget what the face beneath it looks like. Jung called this mask person, and he made a point of reminding us that, as long as we are stuck in it, no one will ever be able to truly know us, not even ourselves. Picture this with me. You wake up, take a deep breath, and before you even open the bedroom door, you're already donning your mask. It's automatic, almost comfortable. There's the smile for your colleagues, the patience for your family, the ready joke for your friends. But deep down, something whispers, "I'm not just this," that something is you, begging to be seen. The problem is that simply removing other people's masks isn't enough to see them. It takes courage to remove your own first, because there's no true friendship when all you offer the world is a character. Jung said, "A persona is what someone is not, but what they and others think they are." That sentence hurts, doesn't it? Because when you're just what others think, who's left to love? And here's the catch. The mask protects. It avoids conflict, ensures acceptance, and opens doors. But everything comes at a price. You feel alone, even when holding someone's hand. Because they're not holding your hand, they're holding the hand of your mask. How many people do you truly trust? People who have listened to your ugly, selfish, fragile sides, who have seen your dark side and stayed anyway. If you can count them on one hand, you're not alone. Almost everyone can. And it's not out of malice. People aren't deceiving you. They don't even know they're trapped in their own mask. They smile at you because they believe the role they're playing is who they are. In the end, it's two masks talking at a bar table. Two personas playing at friendship. It's sad to realize this, I know, but it's also liberating. Because true friendship isn't born between characters. It only blossoms when two people decide, even when afraid, to let their masks slip a little, show the cracks, allow themselves to be seen, and even then accepted. Jung said, "Enlightenment is not achieved by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious." That's what it's about. Realizing that this mask isn't you anymore. It's just a shield. And until you have the courage to show who's underneath, you'll carry on alone, even surrounded by applause. What I want to challenge you today is this. Who are you really? And who among your friends have you seen? If the answer is nobody, maybe it's time to open a small crack in your mask. It's hard, I know, but it's the first step to being seen. The first step to finally feeling at home within yourself. Because true friendship isn't about finding someone who likes your mask. It's about finding someone who, even after seeing everything you hide, decides to stay. Maybe you felt it, a strange anger welling up for no reason. Or a jealousy that makes you ashamed, or even that secret envy that you hide so well. You almost believe it doesn't exist, but it's there, just like it is in all of us. Carl Jung called it, in the shade, that hidden side of our personality that we spend our lives trying to hide even from ourselves. And it's precisely this refusal to look at the shadow that makes our friendships so fragile. Because when you can't live with your own darkness, how can you accept the darkness of another? It's easy to keep up the mask when everything is going well. Easy to be kind, patient, and generous, while no one challenges your deepest wounds. But all it takes is one conflict, one misunderstanding, one disappointment, and the shadow appears. That selfish side, that judgmental side, that side that wants more for itself than for the other. And when that happens, most people run away. They break off friendships. They pretend the problem lies solely with the other person. because admitting that the shadow is ours too would be too painful. Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." And it's true, because only those who have the courage to look within and see all the dirt they've swept under the rug awaken to true friendships. That's the real challenge. No one wants to admit that they're also envious, sometimes manipulative, needy, possessive, and proud. We prefer to project all of this onto others. We point out other people's flaws while cloaking ourselves in the illusion of being better. But here's the point that scares me most and makes me reflect. Until we acknowledge our own shadow, we don't acknowledge the humanity of others. We start to demand that people be perfect, that they never fail, that they always meet our expectations. And when they reveal a side we don't like, a flaw, a weakness, the mask slips, and we dismiss them, as if we don't share the same flaws. That's why true friendships are rare, because they demand something from us that few have the courage to offer: vulnerability, the willingness to look at our own contradictions and still offer acceptance to the other. Because when you embrace your shadow, you can embrace your friend's shadow too. It's uncomfortable, I know, but liberating. You no longer have to pretend you don't feel anger, envy, or fear. You no longer have to constantly police yourself to be the perfect friend, because you're starting to realize that no one is perfect. And this isn't an excuse to be cruel, but a reminder that we are human, and that true friendships only exist between whole humans, not between well-behaved masks. Maybe you're thinking right now about a friendship that ended because they were too selfish with you, or that walked away when you exposed their flaws. This hurts, but it's also an invitation to reflect. Weren't you also using this person to maintain your illusion? Weren't you also projecting onto them everything you didn't want to see in yourself? Jung challenges us to see this, because the shadow doesn't disappear just because you close your eyes to it. It continues to act, unconsciously, sabotaging your relationships, distorting the way you see people. Only when you recognize it can you choose not to be dominated by it. And I know this journey is scary. It's like opening a door to a dark room, full of things you swore you hadn't kept there. But believe me, only after you illuminate this room can you finally inhabit your entire home. And only when you can inhabit yourself completely can someone truly inhabit your life. That's why I insist, look within, not to judge, not to punish yourself, but to reconcile with yourself. Because every piece of yourself that you accept is one less piece you demand the other person hide. And true friendships need space for light and shadow to coexist. If you'd like to continue reflecting on this with me, I invite you to subscribe to the channel here. It's just a click, but it could be the first step toward a journey of self-discovery and more authentic relationships. Because in the end, we all deserve to be seen for who we truly are. And who knows, you might discover that behind your shadow, your greatest light also resides. There's an even more disturbing detail to this whole story, a detail that perhaps explains why so many friendships fall apart, even when they seem solid. Because you see, it's not enough to recognize the mask and see your own shadow. There's a third psychological phenomenon, invisible yet devastating, that Carl Jung called projection. And projection is like a distorted mirror through which we see others. We don't see people as they are, we see how we are inside, and we don't want to admit it. Have you ever noticed how certain people irritate you immensely? People you barely know, yet you already feel a dislike for them, as if they carry something unbearable. Or on the contrary, have you ever admired someone in an almost naive way, as if they were perfect, incapable of making mistakes? These extremes aren't just about who the other person is, but about who you don't want to recognize in yourself. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And this sentence hurts, because it's true. That friend you call selfish might just be mirroring your own struggle to take care of yourself. That colleague you think is manipulative might just be showing the side of you that knows how to play for survival. The person who charms you with their spontaneity and rebelliousness might actually reveal your cowardice in being free. Projection is treacherous because it's unconscious. You don't realize you're placing your own characteristics denied, repressed in the other person's lap. You accuse them, judge them, and distance yourself. Or at the opposite extreme, you idealize them, place them on a pedestal, and expect from them what only you could give yourself. And the other person, poor thing, isn't to blame. Neither are you. It's the psyche at work, trying to free itself from the burden of facing itself. But there's a high price to pay for living this way. You never see anyone as they truly are. You live surrounded by ghosts. You fall in love through projections. You break off friendships because of mirrors. People aren't who you think they are. They are who they are. You're just the one who can't yet see them beyond the veil of your unconscious. This also explains why some friendships seem so intense at first, almost magical, and then fall apart. When you project your denied qualities onto someone, you create a fantasy. You believe that person will finally fulfill what you lack, but no one can sustain the weight of our projections for long. When reality sets in, and it always does, you feel like you've been deceived. But in truth, you've deceived yourself, and perhaps most painfully, while you project your shadows and lights onto others, no one ever truly knows you, because your relationship isn't with the real person, but with the image your mind has created of them. Friendship is, at best, a half-truth, an encounter between illusions. Jung also warned that the first step to reclaiming authentic relationships is to withdraw projections. In other words, bring back to yourself what you've placed on the other person. Ask yourself, why does this person irritate me so much? Why does this quality fascinate me? Why does this attitude hurt me more than it should? And instead of reacting, look within. Discover which part of you is screaming there. The difficult part is that this process is painful, because when you remove the projections, you find yourself naked before your own wound. You realize that the problem isn't just them, but also you. The anger, the exaggerated admiration, the hurt. All of this says more about what's hidden inside you than about who the other person really is. And this is where many people give up. They'd rather change friends, cut ties, change their environment, than face this distorted mirror. But the truth is, there's no point in running away. Wherever you go, your shadow follows. Your projections persist. And until you retract them, you remain unable to see others clearly. When you finally start seeing people without the weight of your projections, something changes. Expectations diminish. Judgments soften. You begin to accept people as they are. Human, flawed, complex. Because you've already begun to accept yourself as such too. And in that rare moment, something genuine can be born. A friendship in which no one needs to be perfect. No one needs to carry what isn't theirs. No one is elevated to hero or demoted to villain. It's simply a possible encounter between two bare realities. No ghosts, no illusions, no distorted mirrors. This is the beginning of a mature relationship, and also the beginning of a new way of existing, less tied to what the unconscious wants to hide, more open to what life has to show. Because in the end, each time you retract a projection, you become more whole. And the more whole you become, the more capable you are of seeing and loving the other person as they truly are. And there is yet another layer to this loneliness, perhaps the most difficult to perceive, precisely because it is invisible to our eyes, and at the same time, shapes almost everything about us. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious, a deep tangle of inherited patterns, ancient symbols, fears and desires that aren't really yours, but that you carry as if they were. That's why, often you can't differentiate what you really want from what was programmed into you long before you were born. Have you ever stopped to question why you act the way you do in your friendships? Why do you seek out people who fit certain roles? The counselor friend, the rebellious friend, the one who always makes you laugh. And you, of course, also occupy one of these roles. The one everyone expects you to be. Not because anyone asked you to, but because everyone, without realizing it, is following scripts written thousands of years ago. Jung discovered that these forces manifest as archetypes, universal images that live within all of us, and that make us repeat generation after generation the same patterns of behavior. That's why you feel you need to be the trustworthy friend, or the strongest in the group, or the one who calms conflicts. Not because you decided to be that way, but because the collective unconscious decided for you. And herein lies the danger. When you don't realize you're being guided by these invisible forces, you end up mistaking them for who you are, and you end up confusing others with the collective masks they wear too. That's why so many friendships feel so predictable, so repetitive, so superficial. Deep down, it's not you who's there, nor are they. They're old characters, playing on an old stage. Jung reminds us that as long as you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it destiny. And this fate is the same one that makes so many friendships mere repetitions. Nothing new, nothing authentic, just a theater in which no one dares to deviate from the script. It's painful to admit, but most of our relationships aren't with real people, but with collective projections that everyone accepts without question. We behave as society expects. We choose friends who reinforce our social persona. Even the groups we belong to follow predictable dynamics. There's always the leader, the court jester, the caretaker, the self-sacrificer, and everyone fulfills these roles as if there were no other choice. This awareness hurts, because when you realize you're trapped in this game, you're tempted to break away from everything, abandon all your friendships, and flee from the collective. But Jung wasn't asking us to isolate ourselves. He was asking us to be aware, the awareness that these forces exist, and that we can choose not to be prisoners of them. This is the key, becoming aware of the collective unconscious, so you can move more authentically within it, recognizing that certain attitudes aren't truly yours, that certain desires weren't born from your heart, that certain patterns have nothing to do with you, but with generations and generations that came before. When you start to realize this, a space emerges, a space where you can breathe, and in that space you start to see others differently too. You start to realize that they too are stuck in old roles, that the friend who always plays the strong one might be tired of it, that the funny friend might cry alone, that the group leader might just want to be taken care of for a moment. This awareness opens the way to something more human, more intimate, more real. When you can see beyond the roles, you can finally touch the person behind them, and that is rare. It's a gift, so perhaps it's worth pausing for a moment and asking yourself, who are you when no one's looking? And who are the people you call friends when they're no longer in the spotlight? It's constant, daily work of deconstruction, of humility, of listening. But every step is worth it, because the more you free yourself from the collective unconscious, the more you can see the uniqueness in others. And when that happens, friendship ceases to be just a silent agreement between masks and becomes a meeting of souls. If this reflection has resonated with you so far, please leave a like below. This small gesture shows me that somehow my words reached you, and that, little by little, we are creating a space for more genuine conversations, even in this enormous collective of voices that is life. And maybe now, after all this, you can feel where it really hurts. Because it's not just the mask that suffocates. It's not just the shadow that scares. It's not just the projections that confuse or the inherited roles that imprison you. The deepest wound is that of never having been truly seen. How many times in silence have you found yourself thinking, if they knew who I really was, would they still stay? This fear of being rejected for being whole is what keeps us in a perpetual theater. We are all grown children, still begging for approval, still begging for validating glances, still hiding our pain so as not to appear too weak to be loved. Jung knew this. He said, the biggest problem of modern man is not having the courage to be himself. And this cowardice isn't born of malice, but of the ancestral fear of being excluded, expelled from the pack left behind. In the past, this meant death. Today, we don't die of hunger, but we slowly die of emotional loneliness. Because not being seen is a kind of death, a gray existence in which you become merely a reflection of what others expect. And the greatest irony is that, by trying to please others in order to be loved, you end up creating fragile, superficial bonds that break at the first sign of conflict. Because those who connect with you aren't connecting with you. They are connecting with your performance. You feel it, don't you? In the friendships that evaporated for no reason. In the conversations where you didn't have the courage to say what you really thought. In the times you laughed at jokes that hurt you just to avoid upsetting others. All of this leaves invisible scars. It creates a hole inside your chest. This wound has always been with us. Perhaps you remember, as a child, the day you cried and no one noticed. Or the day you tried to speak and no one listened. Or the first time you were called difficult simply for not fitting in. That's when you decided better to keep quiet, better to mold myself, better not show who I am. And that's how the mask grew, how the shadow grew stronger, how you learned to project, how you accepted the role the collective gave you. All to avoid rejection, all to be accepted, all to avoid hurting anymore. But it hurts, doesn't it? Even now, even after years of perfecting this persona, it still hurts. Because nothing born of fear can truly fulfill you. No friendship based solely on convention can touch your soul. No approval that requires you to hide can be enough to heal the hole of feeling unseen. And this isn't just about you, it's about all of us. Every person you meet carries this wound too. Even that friend who always seems confident. Even that friend who's always smiling. Even that person who seems to have the world at their feet. Everyone in some way desperately wants to be seen and is afraid of being seen too much. This is the paradox. We want to be seen, but we're terrified of being truly seen. We want to be accepted, but we sabotage ourselves to avoid showing vulnerability. We want intimacy, but we run away the moment someone gets too close. That's why so many friendships don't last. Because sooner or later, someone lets a piece of the truth slip, and that's scary. We reveal a little too much of ourselves, and the other person gets scared too. And both of us back away. We hide behind paper again. We pretend nothing happened. And so we live in lukewarm, comfortable, but cold relationships. And yet there's a beauty in that wound, because it's what reminds us that we're human. It's what pushes us, one day, to take off our masks. It's what gives us the courage to try again. Because deep down we know that nothing compares to the relief of finally being seen and accepted as we are. It might not be easy. Maybe some people will never be able to look at you without filters. Maybe you'll lose some friendships in the process. But for every bond that breaks, a new one can be born. A truer, deeper bond. A meeting where no one needs to pretend. And that's why, despite the fear, it's worth keeping trying. Because the moment someone truly sees you, you truly begin to exist. And perhaps that's the only way to heal the wound. By gradually revealing your truth to the world. Perhaps now you understand why loneliness seems so common, even among those surrounded by friends. It's not just because no one sees us, but also because we ourselves have learned to avoid being seen. There's something paradoxical and painful about us. The intimacy we so desire is also the very thing we fear most. And this silent fear corrodes our relationships, making them fragile, superficial, like sandcastles ready to crumble at the first real touch. Carl Jung observed, with an almost cruel lucidity, that people will go to any extreme to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what makes intimacy such a delicate territory. Because for someone to see us fully, we must first see ourselves. We must be willing to pull back the curtains and show the messy rooms, the dusty windows, the crumbling rooms we hide even from ourselves. And that's scary. Think about the times when someone got too close. When someone asked how you were really doing, and you smiled and said you were fine, even though you felt like you weren't. When someone complimented you on something you despise about yourself. When someone saw a side of you you didn't want to show. Remember that feeling? Like your skin was too thin, like it was safer to retreat. This is the mechanism so many use without realizing it, maintaining distance, creating bonds that seem strong, but are nothing more than fragile threads. Jokes to avoid serious conversations, laughter to stifle tears, advice so we don't have to listen. This is how we occupy spaces without ever truly inhabiting them. Intimacy is frightening, because it demands the mask fall, because it forces us to look at the other without the lens of projection, because it disrupts the roles inherited from the collective and invites us to embrace the singularity of who we are, because it reveals wounds we hide even from ourselves. And more than anything, intimacy jeopardizes our fantasy of control. As long as we maintain our surface control, we can believe we're safe. But letting someone get too close means giving up control of the narrative. It means risking rejection, judgment, and abandonment. It means admitting that perhaps we're not as easy to love as we'd like to believe. That's why so many friendships end up on the brink of the abyss. That's why so many people choose to remain in the comfortable solitude of superficiality, rather than risk the uncertain plunge of real connection. But there's something we forget when we protect ourselves too much. Loneliness hurts too. And although more predictable, it's no less cruel. Choosing not to open up spares us one pain, but condemns us to another, never being truly touched by anyone. Jung said that loneliness doesn't come from not having people around, but from not being able to communicate the things that are important to us. It's not the absence of the other that hurts us. It's the absence of ourselves in our relationship with them. It's being together, but not being. It's sharing moments, but not sharing the soul. Intimacy requires courage, not just to be accepted, but also to accept. Because when someone opens up to us, we also see their mess, and sometimes it's a reflection of our own. And this scares us, because it reminds us of what we haven't yet healed. That's why often, when someone starts to show their true colors, the relationship breaks down. The person who was always fun suddenly cries, and we don't know how to handle it. The friend who was always strong crumbles, and we retreat. Because seeing someone else's humanity reminds us of our own fragility. But perhaps, if we look at it from a different perspective, this isn't a problem. Perhaps it's an invitation. Because only when someone shows us their cracks, do we feel empowered to show ours too. Only when someone reveals their truth to us, do we learn that we don't need to hide. Intimacy is scary, yes, but it's also the only real bridge between two souls. And as scary as it may be, nothing in the world replaces the feeling of being accepted, even after revealing your own shadow, of remaining even after the other person reveals theirs, of realizing that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of affection. And perhaps that's the most beautiful thing about true friendships. They're not just about laughter, nor just about easy times. They're about courage. The courage to take off your armor and say, "Here I am, just the way I am. If you want to stay, stay." And when someone chooses to stay, even after seeing everything you wanted to hide, something changes forever. Because in that moment, loneliness dissolves. And you realize that maybe, just maybe, there's room in this world for you to be who you truly are. And even when intimacy finally happens, even when someone sees beyond their mask and decides to stay, a new challenge arises. One that few have the courage to face: the unspoken silence between us. Because it's not enough for someone to accept us as we are. We need to learn to speak what truly matters, putting into words what has always been kept hidden. And this is an even more delicate territory, where so many friendships are lost. How many times have you felt something about someone and not said it? How many times has something hurt you and you swallowed it hard? How many times have you felt love and not had the courage to show it? This silence builds up, weighs on you, creates invisible walls between you and the other person, until one day, there are no bridges left. Jung said, "Life's biggest problems are insoluble. They are never solved, only overcome." And this silence is part of these problems. Because it's not just any silence, it's a silence full of things you didn't know how to say, or things you thought you shouldn't say, or things you thought weren't worth saying, but it was worth it. Because every unsaid word leaves an empty space, and these empty spaces fill with fantasies, misunderstandings, and fears. Friendship becomes filled with assumptions. He didn't ask because he doesn't care. She didn't say anything because she judges me. They drifted apart because I'm not enough. And so, the relationship breaks down, not for lack of love, but for lack of conversation. It's painful to admit that most of us haven't learned to truly speak. We haven't learned to say, "That hurt me," or "That made me happy," or even "I miss you." We haven't learned because we always thought people should guess, or because we were afraid of appearing weak, or because someone taught us way back when that too much emotion drives people away. And then we fall silent, and we wait for the other person to speak first, and the other person falls silent too, waiting for us to speak, and no one speaks. Until one day, the friendship falls apart, and no one understands why. Silence is also cruel, because it's treacherous. It can disguise itself as peace, maturity, even kindness. But often it's none of these. It's simply fear. Fear of exposing oneself. Fear of hearing what one doesn't want to hear. Fear of not being reciprocated. And this fear robs us of opportunities. The opportunity to clear up a misunderstanding before it turns into hurt. The opportunity to reinforce affection before it fades. The opportunity to say thank you before it's too late. Because behind the silence, there's always a truth worth speaking. Sometimes it's simple, "I miss you." Sometimes it's harsh, "I felt alone when you weren't around." Sometimes it's beautiful, "I'm grateful you stayed when everyone else left." But whatever it is, that truth needs to find a voice. When you have the courage to speak up, something changes in the friendship. The other person also feels they can speak up, that they don't need to pretend, that they can be honest, that they can be human. This is the kind of space that transforms lukewarm relationships into deep bonds. Not because everything becomes perfect, but because everything becomes real. And make no mistake, the truth doesn't distance. What does is the lack of it. Silence, over time, hardens hearts and erases connections. But the truth, however painful it may seem, still brings us closer. Because true intimacy only exists when there is true conversation. And perhaps this is the time for you to reflect. Who have you been silent with? What words are hidden inside, waiting to be spoken? Who in your life deserves to hear your truth before time takes the chance away? I'd like to invite you to share here, in the comments, what's most impacted you so far in this reflection. Or even write down something you've wanted to say to someone, but never had the courage to. Sometimes writing is the first step toward finding your own voice. In the end, that's what saves us. Talking. Even when we're afraid. Even when we're trembling. Even when we don't know if the other person will stay. Because what really drives us apart isn't saying too much, it's being silent for too long. And even when you take off your mask, embrace the shadow, suppress your projections, dare to be intimate, and finally find the courage to speak up. There's still something that can silently harm any relationship: the expectations you place on others. This is perhaps one of the most subtle traps in our psyche, but also one of the most dangerous for any friendship that aspires to be genuine. Jung warned us about this tendency. We project not only the denied parts of ourselves onto others, but also all our unmet needs, all our dreams of being saved, all the roles we wish someone would finally come and play for us. As if to say, "I accept you as a friend, but only as long as you fit into what I need you to be," and that weighs heavily, because no one can be everything to anyone. Think for a moment, how many times have you been disappointed because someone didn't act as you expected? Because they didn't support you when you most wanted them? Because they didn't say the right words? Because they didn't notice your suffering without you asking for help? This pain is real, and it's easy to turn this disappointment into hurt, anger, and withdrawal. But we rarely ask ourselves, did this person know I expected this of them? Could they have given me what I needed? Because expectation works like an unspoken contract, and that's precisely the problem. It wasn't agreed upon. It was only silently dreamed up by you. Jung said that where love reigns, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is absent. And this phrase seems to speak of something distant, but it applies here. Expectations are often the most disguised way of trying to control others. It's when you no longer see them as they really are, but as you wish they were to ease your own pain. And so, little by little, friendship ceases to be a free encounter and becomes a stage for subtle demands. A friend cannot fail. They cannot step aside to take care of themselves. They cannot say no. They cannot have limits, because in your imagination, they must always be available to fill the void you yourself refuse to face. But you see, every human being has a limit. Every human being has their own shadow to carry, their own wounds to heal, their own failures to face. And sometimes they can't give you everything you want, not because they don't care, but because they're trying to survive their own storm. This realization can be painful at first, because it shatters the illusion that a true friend never fails, never tires, never strays. But it's also liberating, because only then can you love another person more lightly, not for what they give you, but simply for who they are. And that requires humility. It requires realizing that no friendship, no matter how beautiful, will completely fill the hole that only you can fill. That it's unfair to place all the responsibility for your happiness or well-being on someone else's shoulders. This is where many people get lost, waiting for others to give us what we ourselves are not willing to build within ourselves. Expectation is like a thorn stuck in the heart of relationships. Small, almost invisible, but deeply painful. And it only leaves when you realize that friendship isn't an obligation for the other person to fulfill your needs. It's a gift, and like any gift, it can't be demanded. It can only be welcomed. When you begin to free yourself from this dynamic, the relationship changes. You begin to see your friend with more tenderness, with more patience, with more realism. You stop demanding that they guess what you need. You stop feeling hurt for not receiving something that was never promised. You stop feeling rejected by every limit they set. And then, for the first time, friendship breathes. Because now it's no longer a contract of silent expectations, but an encounter between two free souls who choose each other not because they need to, but because they want to. Perhaps it's precisely this freedom that makes friendship so valuable. The freedom to be human, to be able to fail, make mistakes, need space, and still be loved. So look at your relationships today and ask yourself, what have I been silently waiting for that no one could ever give me? This question may hurt, but the answer can pave the way for something lighter, more true. And who knows, little by little, you might also allow people to be who they are, without burden, without pressure, without suffocating expectations. Just them. Just the way they can be now. Even after everything we've discussed so far, the mask, the shadow, the projections, the fear of intimacy, the silence that chills bonds, the expectation that suffocates, there's still one final layer that needs to be seen, perhaps the deepest of all, the feeling of not belonging anywhere. That subtle, constant feeling of always being a little out of place, as if everyone around you finds some kind of fit, except you. Maybe you've felt this in a group of friends, even among those you love, a pang in your chest when you realize you laugh at the same jokes, hang out at the same parties, but still can't escape that inner loneliness. It's as if your soul is always one step behind, observing everything from the outside. Carl Jung observed that the encounter with oneself is for many the encounter with one's own loneliness. And perhaps that's why so many people shy away from this encounter, because the closer you get to your essence, the more you realize that it's too unique to fit entirely into any group, any relationship, any ready-made idea of us. It's painful to realize this, because we've been taught our whole lives that belonging was the key to happiness, to be accepted, to be loved. But no one warned us that this belonging, when based solely on pleasing, hiding, and fitting in, brings no peace, only exhaustion. And that's why so many people remain in empty friendships, in groups that don't nurture, in bonds that exist only out of habit. Because abandoning the false sense of belonging is scarier than living a lie. But here's the hard truth. You'll only truly belong somewhere when you first belong to yourself. As long as you keep trying to fit in to please others, to feel accepted, to avoid being left out, the feeling of emptiness will remain, because you're not there as a whole, only as a fragment of yourself. This is the greatest paradox of human relationships. Friendship only blossoms when you no longer need it to feel whole, when you allow yourself to be who you are, even if it means distancing yourself from others, when you stop molding yourself to fit other people's expectations. The pain of not belonging can be a call to individuation. The process, Jung believed to be the psyche's deepest goal, becoming who you are. Not in the selfish sense, but in the authentic sense. Finding within yourself a center so solid that you no longer need to cling to others to feel like someone. And then only then can you choose your friendships based on freedom, not need. You stop accepting shallow relationships just to avoid being alone. You stop forcing connections with those who don't truly see you. You start saying no to situations that harm your integrity. This doesn't mean isolation. It means honesty. It means no longer occupying places that don't want you whole, just pieces. It means no longer selling yourself for a little acceptance, because now you no longer negotiate your essence. And in this movement, something beautiful begins to happen. You begin to attract people who have also traveled this inward journey, people who have looked in the mirror, faced their own shadow, dared to speak their minds, people who have also felt out of place, and therefore know the importance of welcoming. When you allow yourself to belong to yourself, loneliness changes its tone. It stops being a painful abyss and becomes a fertile space, an inner place where you can rest. And from this place, friendship stops being a patch for your wound and becomes a meeting of two whole souls. You may not find an entire group that understands you. Maybe there are only a few, or even just one. But you no longer need to be accepted by everyone to feel worthy, because now you no longer need to diminish yourself to fit in. And that's the most liberating thing, realizing that you don't need to belong to anything outside of yourself to finally feel at home. Perhaps this is the hardest secret to accept. It's not in the eyes of others that you find yourself, it's in your own. And when that gaze becomes whole, friendships can finally be whole too. And then, after so much inner journeying, perhaps you can now perceive the true miracle of genuine friendship. Not one that exists for appearances, not one that lives behind well-rehearsed masks, nor one that survives only as long as projections still sustain the fantasy. I'm talking about that rare friendship, born from the encounter of two souls who have already recognized themselves as alone, whole, and yet choose to walk together. Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." And self-acceptance is the foundation for accepting others. When you stop resisting your shadows, your weaknesses, your contradictions, you finally open yourself up to seeing the other person's humanity without needing to change them. This is the silent beauty that lies deep within everything. Friendship isn't meant to complete you. It's not a remedy for your loneliness, nor the solution to your fear of not being enough. True friendship is encounter. It's communion. It's a kind of blessing that only happens when you're no longer so afraid of being alone. When you reach this inner place, life becomes lighter. You stop demanding that others carry burdens that are yours alone. You stop confusing the other person's presence with the obligation to fill what's still missing within you. And it's then, surprisingly, that the friendships that remain become deeper. Because now you offer yourself completely, and you're willing to welcome the other person completely, too. You realize it's no longer about having a crowd around you. It's about having people who matter. It's about knowing there's someone you can be yourself with, without fear, and that you can be that someone for someone else, too. These relationships don't scream. They don't appear in perfect photos on social media. They don't have a predictable script. They live in the stillness of details, a comfortable silence, a look of understanding, without judgment, a hug that asks for nothing in return. And that, in the world we live in, is a true privilege. Being who you are is rare enough. Being who you are, and being seen and accepted, that way is a miracle. So if anything in these words resonated with you, I wanted you to know you've already taken a huge step just by stopping to reflect. Because most people spend their entire lives running away from these truths, running to avoid facing their own reflection. But you stayed, you listened, you felt, And that's exactly why I want to invite you to join me on this journey. Subscribe here so we can continue walking side by side, week after week, in this deep dive that makes us more human and more whole. Leave a like if in some way this video brought you light or a little peace. And if you feel it in your heart, share in the comments which of these truths hurt and freed you the most. I read every word, and every story you share here reminds me why it's worth continuing to bring this reflection to you. You may not realize it now, but you've already begun to transform. And this transformation is a gift not only for you, but for everyone who walks alongside you. Because every time someone chooses to be whole, they open the door for others to choose as well. So take a deep breath. Feel this silent privilege of being who you are, and knowing that yes, there are still people willing to see you beyond the masks. And remember, there is nothing more courageous, more beautiful, and more revolutionary than choosing to show yourself completely in a world that insists on asking for pieces.